I think this is an important topic of discussion for us, and perhaps a very fine opportunity to bring in our second speaker. I would like to invite Dr. Ronald J.B. to share his remarks on migration in the German context, particularly in light of recent elections in the Federal Republic, in Austria. Dr. B has had a long and distinguished career on both sides of the Atlantic, serving in high-level positions in Berlin and in Washington, D.C. It also pleases me very much that he is with us on this special evening, as he and I edited together a 30th year anniversary celebratory volume of Robert Bosch Foundation Alumni Association members a number of years ago. Ron has been most engaged as a transatlantic citizen in the truest sense of the word, understanding rights as well as responsibilities. So it is with great pleasure that I ask him both to say a few words about himself, modest that he is, and to share some remarks regarding the presentation by Dr. Marta Pachocka and the question from a member of our audience. Welcome, Ron, and thank you so much for joining us from San Diego.
It's a real pleasure, and the thanks really come from me, not only to Dr. Mazzucchelli, who is also a steadfast transatlanticist and doing very important work in Poland, but also the Robert Bosch Foundation, the Stiftung, that has spent over $30 million supporting Robert Bosch Fellows since 1984. And that's a lot of money. But it's more important they have invested in the future of cooperation across the Atlantic, and part of their mission is also working with Poland. So we owe Bosch a debt of gratitude for reaching out, funding events such as these, as well as funding ongoing studies and relationships across borders and across oceans, if you will. But bottom line, we wouldn't have the students didn't show up. So thanks for showing up and spending your evening with us, or else we'd just be talking amongst ourselves. The book that Dr. Mazzucchelli mentioned is called Mapping Transatlantic Futures, German-American Relations in a Global World. And as that suggests, it's not just the European Union that needs to think of itself within a closed set of borders, but also, especially with the refugee crisis and the migration crisis generated from the Arab Spring, largely of 2011, it's now a question of how does the European Union relate to the outside world, and does it accept that role, or does it go back to more nationalist leanings? That's just to start that out. A little bit about my background. I have a degree in European history and French literature from the University of California, San Diego, and I did my graduate work at the Johns Hopkins University of Advanced International Studies, 1 year in Bologna, Italy, a year in Washington, D.C. While in D.C., I worked for the Library of Congress Congressional Research Service in the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Division, informing Congress about what's going on. I then worked as a special assistant for national security affairs in the Pentagon for 5 years with a think tank looking at European-American relations and U.S.-Soviet relations in particular. Written 6 books on the history of nuclear weapons. Also co-edited this book on German-American relations, written the guide to the breakup of the Soviet Union as well as to the breakup of Yugoslavia. So, been involved in a lot of things. I now teach here on the West Coast and continuing to write along these lines. I think it's particularly useful that here's a chunk of the Berlin Wall. I don't know if you can see it. That today is the 28th anniversary of the destruction of the Berlin Wall. And that gave way to the opportunity for the construction of Europe in a much broader form than it had been during the Cold War. There's a notion, especially in Germany that Germany's identity and role was seen and had to be seen within a broader European vision, politically first and economically second, set within a pan-European context. The German politicians and leaders have embraced this idea since the end of World War II. That has been consistent from Adenauer, who's CDU, to Kohl, who is CDU, to Merkel, who's CDU. Social Democrats have also felt the same way. Now, they have embraced this idea, and the reason they have embraced it was because of a construct of a more peaceful and prosperous future across Europe. This idea has begun to be challenged in recent elections. Even the BBC has come out with this called the Guide to Nationalist Parties Challenging Europe, the idea of Europe. And the question now becomes, is this a trend? Is this something that goes back to the economic frailty of the Weimar Republic being reflected in the Eurozone? Or is this just a passing fad with the overall principle of Europe standing tall and stronger than this passing fad? It started with Brexit, and you could even put a bookend on it with the recent Austrian election, where a far-right candidate who happens to be 31 years old, Sebastian Kurz, is now going to become the Chancellor of Austria. In Germany, Chancellor Merkel is going to be serving in her 4th term. The only other person to do that was her mentor, namely Helmut Kohl. Helmut Kohl, I don't know if you can see this or not, but here's a copy of one of his biographies, and he signed this book to me on December 7th, 1987, which is Pearl Harbor Day for us Americans, but it was also the day that Gorbachev and Reagan signed the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty that Germany really worried about because they were targeted by Soviet SS-20s. They saw that as their potential Pearl Harbor.